When we talk about the different types of networks that are out there, hopefully you guys know what a LAN is. What's it stand for? Local area network, and then the WAN is the wide area network. Certainly the LANs could have a hybrid approach where you could have one-to-many of these inside of your LANs. Typically, what do you think that you usually will see in any given scenario? What's the most popular one that you see typically?
Star.
Typically star, where you usually you'll have a hub or something that just is somebody just as quick as they possibly can set it up. But then you may have one that actually has, the star may have a node that comes off that goes down into, a bus. So with each one of these, and as we go through the remainder of these slides in this particular domain and throughout the rest of the class, the important thing is to think about what vulnerabilities could be introduced with each and any of these right here. And for instance, the bus, there's this thing that we'll cover later on in this domain that's called the vampire attack. Anybody ever seen a little vampire node before? And how apropos right around the Halloween time frame that you could talk about something like that. Essentially, if you have a cable, you can actually take these little vampire nodes and it actually will pierce the cable. And you can actually, from that pierce in the cable, you can run a new line. And it's a physical man in the middle that actually could be a span port that could replicate all traffic that's coming across the wire, which is kind of neat. Now with fiber, you can't actually do that because fiber is fiber. There's so many little tiny particles in it, but with Cat5 you can. You can pierce it coaxially, you can pierce it. Think about it at your house, if you've snipped the coaxial and then drawn it back a little bit, you can just put it in exactly the way that you snipped it out. So some of the different types of cabling out there are susceptible to things like that. So at a high level, this may be difficult for you to read in your handout there, and I tried to limit the amount of times where the handouts, 3 per slide, or 3 per page, gets to a point where it is unreadable, but hopefully I tried to mitigate that by offering up soft copy as well, so feel free to hit me up on that if you haven't already. The bus, the ring, the star, the tree, and really I think that the mesh is kind of just like you think it would mean. It really is one that we're seeing more and more because it gives redundancy, as opposed to a lot of these that don't. One of the things that you may see is the FDDI. Anybody ever heard of FDDI? And it's not to be confused with 50 Cent, but it's FDDI. It's the fiber distributed. Somebody help me out here. What's it stand for? Fiber distributed. Where essentially, as you go around the ring, you get a token, and the fiber will allow you to talk on the token ring as you go through and try to do a transmission. And it really helps with being able to make sure that there's no collisions on the network, which isn't really too big of a deal that much anymore. But back in the earlier days of network topologies, people used to have a token to be able to talk on the network. So we talked a little bit about what LAN means. Really, it's small geographic areas. There's 2 different types of signals that are utilized. One is this thing called baseband, and then another one that you've probably heard of before is broadband. And of these 2, they're both super important. We're seeing more and more get away from the analog signals over into a digital signal. So going from broadband back to baseband. But really, I think that both of these are still utilized an awful lot. What do you guys have to say about the differences between baseband and broadband? What's an easy way for you to remember the differences between baseband and broadband? Anybody? None of you double E's want to speak up here? Well, I don't have a magic pill that you can eat that gives you the distinction between the two. I know that typically the reference and signaling types between the two is one is digital and then one is analog. So that's usually the reference, the differences that I see are tested on in the book here. So WANs, not going to spend very much time on that, but the internet is a WAN. You can have two different types of switching, the circuit switched or the packet switched. You probably have seen a black and white video of a lady sitting at the operator machine where she's physically moving all the different cables and plugging it into different switches, and really that's the paradigm that people typically will use with a dedicated circuit. So you actually physically are moving and making a connection over a circuit switched phone call is typically the way that you typically will see this referenced whenever you start talking about network switching. Whereas packet switched is really a queue. It's sliced and diced up to be able to be pushed across in low burst and then reassembled on the other side. And that's where a lot of times you see the sequence numbers in TCP come into play. Remember, TCP is what? Connection oriented. And so with connection oriented, sometimes the packets get to the destination sooner than expected. So the machine that it queues up on has to put it back in the order. And so what we do is we assign a sequence number to that. So on the sender may send 1, 2, and 3 across in a segmented or queued mechanism. So it may just queue it up and send it all across. Well, the receiver may not get it 3, 2, 1. They may get it 2, 1, 3. And what our machines or our devices do is they'll reassemble it in order for us based off of that sequence number in the TCP packet that's coming across the wires. And if you've never seen that before, Wireshark actually has not only the SYN, the SYNAC, and the ACK, but if you look at it after the ACK is made, it also assigns a sequence number to it. So you can reprioritize it and get it out of the queue in the order that it was supposed to come to you in. We talked a little bit about this right here, the IP addresses. I think that probably majority of us are familiar with IP addresses, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this just to make sure everybody's aware of what's going on here. But really, you take an IP address, and then through DNS, you translate it into a human-readable name. So Domain Name Services takes an IP and translates it into cyberprotects.com. Or you take cyberprotects.com and then you translate it into 74.22.54.101. And that's the whole reason why we have these IP addresses, is to specifically assign a address to a name. And that's where DNS comes into play. So one of the things that we're going to go through now is this concept of the octet. And by this time in your career, and I think less so in some of the other classes that